around giving a lot of input and background to people, members specifically, but members of the public, on various aspects of plant conservation. And we're now moving to a space where we want to give you even more tools to be able to practically partake in the processes that guide what happens to the environment. So I am going to start by introducing our first speaker, and all our speakers actually have submitted a recording, but we do have access to them. So yeah, keep the conversation going in the chat. Let me know where you're from, how you heard of the webinar. There's the formal questions going to the Q&A for the speakers or for myself. And we will be running all the talks back to back and then having a chance for questions at the end. And also, if it's your first time, we run a non-broadcast after party, also on Zoom, with a different link, which you will have in your invitation. And that's for a more kind of informal chat and longer questions. So yeah, thank you for joining us. It's autumn. We can feel the chill in the air. The little green things are sprouting. And I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker and then click play. So Susie Brownlie has an MSc in Environmental Studies from UCT. She's worked as an environmental assessment practitioner for over 30 years, focusing on biodiversities and the inclusive impact assessment. She's a past chair of IAIA International's Biodiversity and Ecology section, has published a number of papers in peer-reviewed journals, and has contributed to the writing of international and national guidelines on impact assessment and biodiversity assessment. And while she's not here, I just wanted to say Susie's been, since I've been around in the conservation field, like a real source of inspiration and just like amazing information in this EIA space as a practitioner. And yeah, there's a lot that you can learn from her. So let me share screen. And enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Rupert has asked me to talk briefly about environmental impact assessment and give you an overview of what it is. And so I'm going to do that now. I have some slides to share with you. And let's start. What is this thing called environmental impact assessment? If I look at the definition provided by the International Association for Impact Assessment, it's a structured process for considering the implications for both people and the environment of proposed actions or proposed projects, while there is still an opportunity to modify, improve, or even abandon the proposals. So that's what we're trying to do. And essentially, it's a planning and decision-making tool which encourages us to look before we leap. So we don't just fire away at development without considering the consequences of what we plan to do. What are the stages in a typical EIA process? In South Africa, we have a number of different steps, as we do internationally. So we start with screening, which traditionally is the question, do I need to do an environmental impact assessment at all? And in South Africa, it means really, is my activity going to trigger the need for environmental authorization? And the way we check that is we look at the so-called EIA listing notices, and there are 3 of them, and we'll talk about those a bit later. And we can also look at the screening tool, which is a bit of a misnomer if you look at it internationally. But in South Africa, we have a screening tool which is web-based, and it identifies the major sensitivities of the environment that you're going to be affecting. Essentially, it's a kind of scoping process, which is the next major step, which is to identify the main issues and impacts. So there's a bit of an overlap there. But scoping is a critical step in EIAs. it's where you say, what are the main issues? What are the main concerns? What are likely to be the big impacts of this proposed activity? And also really important during scoping is to look at reasonable and feasible alternatives. So you don't just come in with one set option. You look at ways to maybe avoid having significant impacts and so on. So you look at those options. And then also typically you draw up terms of reference if you need to do a full-on EIA. And in South Africa, again, we have a bit of a funny situation where we have two different routes, basic assessment and a scoping and EIA. And scoping actually is done in both the basic assessment and in the full scoping and EIA route. So don't take scoping to be something just that you do in scoping and EIA. Then after you've scoped and found the key issues and likely impacts, you want to assess those impacts and find out how significant they're likely to be. And you do that before you consider mitigation measures and again after mitigation measures. And then we have a step to say, well, how are we going to implement those mitigation measures? So you draw up what we call an EMPR, Environmental Management Program, in which are captured your mitigation measures, your management measures, how you're going to monitor the effects of both the activities and the effects of your mitigation measures. You want to report on your EIA, and then it is reviewed by decision makers and a decision is taken. So that is what conventionally EIA comprises, those different steps. If we take a step backwards now and just look at what's going on in South Africa, we have a constitution with a Bill of Rights that specifies that everybody has the right to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations. This is really important because it promotes sustainable development. And it goes on to say, through reasonable legislative and other measures that prevent pollution and ecological degradation, promote conservation, and secure ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources, while simultaneously promoting justifiable economic and social development. So it has to be justifiable, but the emphasis is on this ecologically sustainable development. So we really do have a mandate to make sure that our ecosystems persist in the long term with all their biodiversity. Then going one level down, we have our National Environmental Management Act of 1998, which again echoes this ensuring that development will be sustainable. And to do so, it provides us with a set of what we call the Nema principles, National Environmental Management Principles, which include avoiding, minimizing, if you can't avoid completely, minimize and remedy disturbance of ecosystems and loss of biodiversity, pollution and degradation of the environment. It also emphasizes we must take a risk-averse and cautious approach when we're not sure of the consequences, and we mustn't jeopardize the integrity of our ecosystem. So again, very strong emphasis on ecologically sustainable development. Nema includes a chapter 5, which is on IEM, Integrated Environmental Management, that also ensures that we must make the links between social, environmental, ecological, economic considerations to ensure that development will serve not only ourselves, but future generations. So if we look at, going one level down again, the Nema EIA regulations, they refer to EIA as a systematic process of identifying, assessing, and reporting environmental impacts associated with an activity. So it's slightly different from the international definition, but that's what we have. And as I mentioned earlier, there are two routes of EIA. We have the basic assessment process, and we have a scoping and EIA or EIR, environmental impact reporting process. And we've had those regulations. Initially, the Nema regulations were promulgated in 2006, then changed 2020, again 2014, sorry, that should be 2012, 2014, and revised in 2017. The basic assessment process is supposed to be a shorter process and not for complex projects or for massively impacting activities. However, we find that many basic assessment processes have to follow essentially the same steps that you follow in a scoping and EIR process. Although the reporting intervals and the intervals for engaging with the public on issues is different in these two different processes. The need for environmental authorization and subsequently for EIAs is triggered by the type and size of the activity and also by the sensitivity of the receiving environment. So we have 3 listing notices, one for basic assessment, which is based on the types of activities, one for the basic assessment based on the receiving environment, which is our listing notice 3, and then one for a scoping and EIA process or environmental impact assessment report. The role of specialists in EIA is absolutely critical. So that we have typically the EIA practitioner, or what we call the EAP, who coordinates and integrates all the information throughout the EIA process and provides that information to the decision maker who has to act in terms of the legal prescriptions. But the specialists who are given terms of reference by the EAP really do most of the hard work in terms of identifying, assessing, recommending mitigation, looking at alternatives, and so on. So the role of specialists is absolutely vital. What kind of impacts are covered in EIA? Well, the specialist and the EAP has to look at direct impacts, indirect impacts, and cumulative impacts. And these are all slightly different. So typically, a direct impact talks about the footprint of a proposed activity, which occurs at the same time and in the same place as the actual activity itself. Then indirect impacts are quite a challenge. They can occur some distance away from the activity, later stage, through very complex pathways. And examples here are types of pollution that may occur and then only manifest downstream, or concentrated in, for example, air pollution. It may drift into a neighboring municipal area, may affect people some distance away, or ecosystems some distance away. And there's also this issue of new development opening up opportunities for people seeking work or just seeking access to areas that have been previously closed off for access, causing a whole slew of so-called induced impacts. Then cumulative impacts really occur at a landscape scale, and they are the impacts of multiple projects affecting the same resources in space and in time, and lead to the typical death by 1,000 cuts if they're not taken into account properly. And we do have requirements in terms of EIA regulations to look at all of these impacts. And sadly, cumulative impacts is one area which is very poorly looked at, and to some extent, indirect impacts too. So just quickly, the key things in EIAs that really form the core of these processes, the significance of an impact is just so vitally important, and it is what sways a decision maker in taking a decision on a proposed activity. So a significant impact, what is it? It's an impact that may have a notable effect on one or more aspects of the environment, or may result in non-compliance with environmental quality standards or thresholds or targets. So for biodiversity example, for example, if it's a significant impact would be one that would undermine achieving set biodiversity targets. And significance is often and typically looked at through taking into account how long will the impact last? How big is it? What is its probability of occurrence? What spatial scale will it occur on? So there's a whole lot of criteria one can use to help. And essentially, it combines a measure of technical judgment or scientific judgment, as well as values, because things might be important for different communities affected that scientifically might not be recognized. South Africa has such unique biodiversity, as I'm sure you all know, and found only in South Africa. And we really need to make sure that those targets and aspirations, as well as the ecosystem services that biodiversity provides, are secured for the long term. And mitigation is one of the key things, and key ways, mitigation and considering alternatives that we can avoid long-term harm or significant harm. So on the scale of mitigation, what do we have? The absolute first prize is to avoid or prevent any significant negative impacts on our biodiversity. And how do we do that? We can change the scale, siting, design, technology, sequencing, you name it. We have to be creative in looking at ways to avoid and prevent. Minimizing is the next in the so-called mitigation hierarchy, and both of these are called preventive or proactive measures to try and reduce impacts to the extent possible. Then we talk about remediative mitigation measures, and those comprise rehabilitation or restoration, and very, very last resort type of mitigation would be offsets or compensation. But really to be avoided. First prize is certainly avoid or prevent, and then minimize, and then try and patch up to the best possible extent. And then finally, just to emphasize that through environmental impact assessment, we can work to make development less damaging, and we can also try and be creative and innovative to show how it should be contributing positively to sustainability overall. So that is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's a really nice introduction to EIA. And I'm going to roll on right to our next speaker, and also remind people that if they've got questions, they'd rather put it in the Q&A. So our next speaker is Chanel Rampartab. She's worked for CapeNature for 5 years, an ex-colleague of mine there. And in this time, she's worked as a land use scientist, commenting on EIAs and related development policies and frameworks, and has also worked in biodiversity stewardship. There's a webinar for that. And is currently the Conservation Innovation Manager at CapeNature, where she tries to improve the efficiency of conservation efforts. And why I invited Chanel on is it's always useful as an ex-official myself to get an official's view from the inside, and to see how these processes run, and also how the public can contribute in a way which is which builds up the process. So let me again share the video.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Rupert, for the introduction and for this opportunity to talk about CapeNature's role in environmental impact assessments, or EIAs, and how the public can support this process. Let's briefly touch on the EIA process first. The first thing to bear in mind is that not all developments need an EIA. To see if an EIA is needed, consult the EIA regulations and the 3 listing notices which outline the activities that trigger an EIA. The regulations were effected in 2014 and includes regulations for appeals and exemptions. In summary, the listing notices tell you which activities require which process, in other words, a basic assessment or a scoping and environmental impact assessment, and this is based on the risks and impacts of that activity. Competent authorities are decision makers on a development application. You can read more about it in Section 24C of the National Environmental Management Act. National government is the competent authority when the development is proposed by a national department or provincial department responsible for the environment. For example, if CapeNature wanted to build more eco cabins for its tourists, it would go to national government. National government is also the competent authority for transboundary developments or developments in a national protected area. Otherwise, the province is the competent authority, and in the Western Cape, our competent authority for the province is the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. We also have the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy as the competent authority for applications under the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, in other words, mining applications. All EIAs must go through a public participation process whereby interested and affected parties, or I&APs, can comment on the EIA. This public participation process has a time frame associated with it, and all comments received within that time frame must be responded to before a decision is made. And if the comments call for an amendment to the report, then the report is revised as well. So who are I&APs? It could be local communities like you. It could be commenting authorities like CapeNature. It could be environmental NGOs and NPOs like WESA and the Botanical Society, or it could be professionals and businesses like your local Chamber of Commerce. Now let's talk about CapeNature's role in general, as well as its specific role as a commenting authority in the EIA process. I couldn't give a talk to the Botanical Society without showing off some flowers, so here are some photos I took while in the field with Rupert. CapeNature safeguards the Western Cape's biodiversity, both inside our provincial nature reserves and all across the province. The work we do is pretty broad, but I'm going to try to summarize. Some of our work on the left panel is focused on our reserves, some on the right panel is focused off our reserves, and quite a bit in the middle that happens both on and off our reserve. When we comment on development applications outside of our reserves, it complements the two key work streams on the right-hand panel, how protected areas and conservation areas are expanded in number 6, and how we spatially represent the most important areas for meeting our conservation targets in number 7. CapeNature is responsible for commenting on EIAs, but also on related policies, frameworks, guidelines, regulations, acts and amendments thereto, etc. And where we can and where it's needed, we also comment on town planning applications from municipalities. Remember that because we are a biodiversity custodian, all of our comments are biodiversity related. So we cannot, for example, comment on the socioeconomic advantages or disadvantages of a certain development because it's outside our mandate, but you as the public can. On the right is an example of a basic assessment report in the background with the comment I wrote in response in the foreground. So let's take a look at what CapeNature's comment includes. First, we do a summary of the proposed development footprint and any historical comments that we have given on the same application. Then we talk about the landscape conservation value using our best available science and knowledge. So we would look at our biodiversity spatial plan to see where critical biodiversity areas and ecological support areas might be affected. We look at wetlands, watercourses, estuaries, and coasts. We look at ecosystems that are critically endangered or endangered. We look at mountain catchment areas and strategic water source areas so that we are protecting our fresh water. We look at individual plant and animal species of special concern, and we look at connectivity to protected areas and other conservation areas, as well as ecological corridors to make sure that some ecological processes like pollination and animal movement can still continue. What else is in a comment? After we describe the conservation value of the site, we critique the report and the specialist reports if there are any. So some of the questions we might ask are, was the botanical survey done at the right time of the year? How do the report findings compare to our historical data? And this is where crew data and other citizen science data becomes very important because we don't have as many boots on the ground as the public does. We might also ask, was the botanical specialist suitably qualified? Did the specialist adequately survey the development footprint, or did they just go along the roadside and look out the window? Were the conclusions and recommendations made in alignment with the findings and the mitigation hierarchy? This is quite an important question that we have to ask. Then, alongside the critique, we provide recommendations to improve the robustness of the report. For example, we might say that we need a follow-up spring botanical survey to identify more species. We might propose that the remainder of the site is not developed any further or is at least considered for conservation. We might require an additional specialist study to be done. For example, if there's a land-based aquaculture facility, we might ask for a coastal impact study as well. I've also pasted an excerpt here from a comment that I've submitted in the past, just to show you how I word this. So I'm just going to pick a sentence. CapeNature recommends a spring field survey to avoid type 2 false negative errors. Search and rescue is considered best practice and therefore does not constitute mitigation. A botanical specialist must be contracted to undertake the search and rescue and rehabilitation. Finally, we conclude by stating if we agree with what's been recommended already, summarize our additional recommendations, and request other information if we feel that something was lacking. We do not object to an application if we're happy with the way our comments have been taken up during the process, otherwise we might object. Now let's talk about the role of civil society and citizens. You can and should use your power as an INAP. So how do you do that? First, look out for the notices at the proposed development site, but also keep tabs on local newspapers and websites. Then, register yourself as an INAP using the details on the notice. You may also want to attend public meetings because these help to shed light on the proposed development and sort out some issues early on in the process. Public participation must allow for cultural and language requirements, and the commenting period is usually about 30 days. An INAP can comment on all the reports and their various versions that are released, and these comments must be responded to in a separate report. Once the decision is made, the INAP is notified within 14 days of that decision. I pulled this text excerpt from a helpful document from the Western Cape government on EIAs. It talks about what can go wrong in the EIA process when the public comment. First, some people do not follow the procedures and the timelines. Second, some people express their personal views rather than those of their constituency, which is of course only applicable when you are commenting as part of a civil society organization and not as an individual citizen. Third, some people make unrealistic demands. So how can we avoid these issues? Here are some tips for writing your comment. First, you must understand the general EIA process, and I highly recommend the Botanical Society training on this topic. I've had a look at a couple of the lectures and they seem really informative. Second, you must understand the specific proposed development and the public participation process. Then you must know if you are representing yourself as an individual citizen or your organization, your civil society organization. Then when you write your comment, just use your local knowledge. Are there plant species you've seen that were not reported? Do you have specific expertise in bird behavior that you think might be affected by the development? Is the development going to cause a traffic burden? Those are questions you can discuss in your comment. Please be concise, precise, and accurate when you write your comment because broad or irrelevant statements are just noted and ignored. And please be patient because some processes can take years before they reach a decision. That's it from me. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you, Chanel. She's actually on the call, so if there are questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. So speaking of our course, I've asked Nico Mutileni from Limpopo to give us a bit of a breakdown, and then we'll talk from there in terms of how to access it and going forward. But let me introduce Nico. Nico Mutileni has got an MSc in botany from the University of Limpopo in natural resource management. She is based in the Muketsi area of Limpopo and is working as an for the agricultural company ZZ2. You would have seen boxes of that in the store, tomatoes, etc. And she's an environmental scientist there, working on ecological projects. And this also shows how the private sector are getting involved in environment too, and she's doing great work up there. She works with Crew and the Millennium Seed Bank and doing monitoring and specimen collection on the private natural land owned by ZZ2, and is also, for the upcoming City Nature Challenge, the coordinator of the Thohoyandou Limpopo City Nature Challenge of 2022. So she's very busy, and we're very glad to have her as an active member. And let me just share this video.
So last year I was among the people who enrolled for the environmental impact assessment online course. For me personally, it was something that I've always been curious about. I wanted to know what it means and what other processes are involved in EIA. And yeah, so by enrolling into this course, it clarified, it answered some of the questions that I had, and it made me aware of certain roles I can play, even though I'm not a registered EIA. So before I go into details and tell you about my experience, I just want to give you a little bit of a background about myself. My name is Nico Mhlongo. I'm a plant ecologist. I am based in Mugezi, which is 80 kilometers away from Polokwane in Limpopo province. I work for a company called ZZ2 as an environmental scientist. You might know this company for its tomatoes, but they do produce other products as well. Last year, when I enrolled for the online EIA course, I was also selected to go and attend a practical Women in Science course in Kruger National Park. So while studying online, I was also busy with practicals in Kruger National Park. What I'm trying to say is that it was easy for me to integrate the two to find the balance. So if you are interested in enrolling for this course, you will find a balance between your everyday task and the online course. I think one thing that makes it wonderful is because of its online materials that are always available to assist. The lectures are not that long, so for anyone who is employed and they're tired, they don't have time, you won't get bored with such things. And there are also other supporting documents that are always available online. What I did, I downloaded all the materials offline so that I can study them whenever I'm able to do it. As you can tell, I am a fan of online learning because it gives me the opportunity to learn at my own pace and to understand things and to always go and revisit that. Unlike when you're physically attending a class, if you miss a class, then you have missed it, unless if they were recording. Well, I guess that's an online thing where you record things. So that was one of the things. So the lecturer, he explained everything. We had video lecture in the form of PowerPoint, and we have the traditional PowerPoint if you want to work with that, and other supporting documents as I've mentioned. And so if you're, when I was busy studying and I have questions, we used to have like weekly meetings, I think on Friday, where all of us, we meet up, we ask our questions, and if we struggle to answer, in the future, we will book an appointment with Luke, and he will come and clarify things for us. And there were also exercises which were presented in class, so we were able to practice the theory by answering those questions. So that's how it worked. I think in terms of like what was my take home message, I was able to learn how to marry between the environmental laws and regulation as well as EIA, like how to apply them, how do they work. So to see that it was an eye-opening experience, and to know the various protocols that are used when doing biodiversity assessment. So if now I were to read a EIA report, and if I will be able to notice like, okay, they employ these protocols. Did they miss this protocol? So I think it's very important to anyone in biodiversity to understand how the process of EIA works. And one thing was huge which I didn't know, it was the virus listing notices. Like there's the basic assessment reporting, which is done for an area which is less than 10 hectares. And when it's more than 10 hectares, that's where like a full EIA scoping is required. So to know the difference, like, okay, this development, they're going to develop it this much. This is what protocol are they supposed to use? Which listing are supposed to use? So it was, yeah, it's something that I've learned I didn't know before. And there's this I'm a very tech savvy person, and there is this screening tool. It's still there. There's this screening tool online that they use as part of assessment to flag up like sensitive areas and things like that. So it's important to learn this stuff, to understand how it works, and so that we can contribute as a concerned citizen. And one thing I've learned is that um, I can also comment in an EIA report in a proposed development as a person of interest or person of concern. I forgot the term, but I can do that, and you are able to do that. You're able to register as that person, and also when you know what is how the process works, it will be easy for you to go through the document and comment. And I think in the future it will also assist to halt projects that have like negative impact on our biodiversity and things like that. So it was really a great experience for me, and I think it's also important for me to always go back to my notes and learn. There are a lot of terminologies, there are a lot of laws, and that are involved there. But I shouldn't. Uh, I don't want that to intimidate me. I'm taking it one step at a time. Even though I enrolled for this course last year, every now and then I find myself going back to the lectures and trying to understand one thing that I missed, because it's always available there. So yeah, so that is my entire experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico. She's been in field today, so that's why she couldn't join us. I'm going to quickly introduce the course, if you don't mind. And then we've got one more testimonial from a course attendee, and then we're open for questions. Right. So I think it's a key part of how we wanted at the BotSoc to add value to our membership base, because there's a variety of benefits of being a BotSoc member, and we just want to include that. And of course, one of the benefits would be educating you so that you could be a better activist for the environment. And once the course has been developed, and Luke Verburgt has put together a fantastic set of lectures for us, and we've also added additional information in terms of Nema and other texts for you. But I need a couple of people to help me beta test this. So we've just gone live on the BotSoc website with this. It is for members only, for BotSoc members only. So if you're not, there's another incentive to join. And just follow this quick process. So there's the address. It's our website, botanicalsociety.org.za/EIA course, and fill in the web form and submit. And just check your inbox, and you will be able to access the course. So at this point, it's very important to note that even though all members are able to access this information because we've developed it for education, we do request that if you are commenting on behalf of the Botanical Society or wish to do so on behalf of the branch, that you do attend the full course, the formal course. We will be running late in the year, probably in May, as well as checking in with myself and the BotSoc office, because as Chanel mentioned earlier, we want to ensure that we submit quality and consistent comments which deal with the ecological issues at hand and establish us as a credible commenting source from civil society. So then that's what it looks like on the website. Sign up, put in your member number, etc. And then just, sometimes with these automatic mailers, you'll have to go and check your trash or spam folder if it hasn't gone to your inbox, and there you will get the passwords and so forth, when we will be changing the passwords going forward on a regular basis to ensure that members maintain exclusive access. So, and then you'll have access to this wonderful course, and we look forward to you working together with us to better input into environmental impact assessments. Right. So I would like to play one last testimonial from Mone Maria, who's our environmental rep on the Free State Branch Committee. And Mone is an environmental lawyer, and he's been on the committee for a while, so he's got a different perspective from Nico, and I think you will see that it's also very useful to get his perspective.
Hi, everyone. The Bloemfontein branch of the Botanical Society, and my portfolio is conservation. So I attended the EIA course that was by BotSoc that was presented last year, and I found it very useful to assist with dealing with responding to EIAs. So we've been responding to a few EIAs to the north of Bloemfontein, where people have been developing on what we think is sensitive vegetation. And so also with my legal experience, I've done a few of these things in the past. So I've got a bit of background in environmental impact assessment and that sort of thing, but I still gained lots of information through the course that BotSoc presented, because for me, dealt with the EIAs, there's I mean, that they're always adding additional regulations and protocols from the government point of view, and it was a very useful exercise to get updated into the latest information and regulations that exist. I was also introduced to the screening tool, which greatly assists people in doing EIAs. I'm sure that you would, I'm not going to speak about it at length, but it's a great database of plants, fauna and flora of South Africa, and that is definitely an essential tool in the whole EIA area. The good thing that I also learned about the course in the course last year is that certain, as regards, especially as regards plants, there's a certain amount of basic information and that must be contained in an EIA practitioner's report on it. So the course highlighted that this basic information, and without which a report like that is probably doesn't comply. So even just so broadly, then, from my perspective, even though I'm a legal practitioner, these types of EIAs, the whole NEMA, the National Environment Management Act, the regulations and the protocols they're under are quite technical. And this course provided very good guidance on how to navigate and negotiate these which can be very technical types of regulations and legal documents, without which I think it will be difficult if one doesn't have a background in EIAs, without getting sort of understanding from the course that we got. It will be difficult to navigate this terrain without getting this guidance. And if one wants to deliver a useful submission in a EIA process, it's very important to know the technicalities and the different regulations. And so a proper response to any of these, it is crucial to know how to navigate through all this difficult complex regulatory environment. So all in all, I found the course very useful, a very good update, and a very good guide through a fairly complex terrain. Yeah, so that's sort of my experience. Thank you.
Excellent. I see, and thank you to Mona and Bloemfontein for that feedback. I see that the questions in the Q&A have all been answered. We do have Chanel and Red Smart from CapeNature, who are both well-versed in the EIA process online. I don't know, Chanel and Red, you guys want to put on your camera, please? And maybe ask each other some questions while the people start thinking about it. There's a nice question about that I think I'd want Chanel to answer in the chat. Chanel, are you available?
Yeah, I'll just have a look at the question now. Thanks.
Cool. So, and I see Andrea. Sure thing. Do you want to have a discussion in our follow-up? We've got the after party. I will put the link in the chat again. And maybe we can also link you to our local branch if you're not yet working with them in the Algoa area. Cool. Chanel, I actually wanted you to answer it live so that we can get some engagement.
Sure. So I can go ahead. So essentially, once the authorization is granted, that becomes a publicly available document. It's called the environmental authorization. And yes, you can ask for it, because in that environmental authorization, it will list the conditions of approval for that specific development. How do you go about getting the information? You can either ask the applicant, which is normally the environmental assistant, environmental practitioner, or you can ask the landowner, or you can ask your competent authority for your province.
Cool, thank you. And I just wanted to make it clear that each province has got its own environmental authority. So CapeNature is a parastatal down here. And in each province, there are different arrangements, whether they're found within Department of Agriculture or Environment or similar, but your commenting authority would have a provincial legislation as well, which would also tailor the response to the EIA process. Good. Let me check the questions again. Cool. So, Paul, yeah, we're trying to be quite strategic at this stage, and this is why we've got the training going, because at this moment in time, the conservation unit at BotSoc National is me. So we really want to be strategic in where we get involved, but we do want to have our people on the ground who've got the background to be adequately resourced to be able to take it forward. So at this stage, we'd want to be getting involved in, and our training is focused towards providing inputs or inputs and comments on the botanical specialist study of the EIA. So we're the Botanical Society. There are, of course, wetland, social, and other issues that get taken into account, but that's our primary focus, and that's what we're aiming our training towards. So especially things that have got big negative international and national impacts. So in thinking of threatened habitats or threatened species and sensitive areas, those would be where we would want to get involved. I hope that answers your question. Andrea, are you okay with that? Here we go. I would like Rhett, if you can put on your speaker to maybe answer this next question from Nanette, to give some feedback there. Nanette, it would help if you would say which province you were in, please. How's it, Rhett?
Hi, Rupert. Yeah, I'm just checking this question.
Yeah, she's in the Western Cape.
Okay, so you laid your complaint with the local authority. Yeah, I would recommend that you should maybe elevate that to provincial authority, because they would be the competent authority for a NEMA process. If it was specifically related to an EIA, you speak about the dust impact for a specific project.
Yeah, I would actually also say that, and I'd have to go and look on the website to check what's the updated procedure is. But you would be able to. Oh, sorry, I'm just reading out the question for those who can't see it. Excuse me. So Nanette said, I've in the past submitted a complaint where a developer was not complying to mitigation measures being dust impact, and I had to follow a process of laying the complaint to the compliance officer with the local authority, and felt like this official was just going through the motions, or else the procedure to follow was such that allowed for stalling tactics to allow for construction to complete before the complaint is actually addressed. How can one work around this stalling tactic? And as you heard, Red's response was if the developer had gone through an environmental impact assessment, there would be a case and so forth, and then an environmental management plan would be in place, including the mitigation measures. And if there was non-compliance, you should be able to report that to the competent authority, which in this case would be the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. Am I correct, Rhett?
Sorry, yeah, and Rupert, just to add to that as well, the Air Quality Act would also be relevant here. So in that case, it would be your district municipality. So in terms of that legislation, so that's not your EIA legislation, that's the Air Quality Act. So it would be important to also raise it with them. But then if you don't get any luck with the municipality, then to raise it to provincial level.
Cool. Very interesting question there from Paul Naylor. How do you ensure that you are aware of all proposed developments that could affect your organization? So remember, we're a membership-based organization, so those developments affect all of us as members. And then how we are aware of it is also needing the eyes on the ground. So some of the big developments will go into national newspapers, and then everyone sees a 2-page ad about a proposed impact, or but what also happens is they would be in local papers, so like the knock and drop that comes to your house, or sometimes they would only put a notification in the form of a printed notice on the actual property facing the road. So that's why it's important to have all these eyes on the ground to see where these are, because sometimes those notices fall off the fence or people miss the various publications. And so the more active people get in driving around and keeping an eye on the spots that they know are sensitive in their area, that's what we require. So now that you know how to track it, the next thing would be to get involved in the process and then be able to input in a sensible way. And remember, at the end of the day, if we pitch our commenting right, and this is very much tied into the citizen science work we've spoken about previously. So our citizen science work in iNaturalist feeds directly into conservation prioritization work. Then that closes the loop for us to be able to contribute better to EIA. Paul, I hope that answers your question. Good. Okay, so any last questions? We're almost at 6 o'clock. I'm going to again put the link to the after party in our in the chat there. So if people want to attend that Zoom, and then I've got an ad break right now to close us off. I do want to thank all the speakers for their contribution. So that's Susie Brownlie, Chanel Rampartab, Nyiko Mutileni, and Monet Marias. And pulling through that link now to the observations. Let's look at the last couple of slides. Right. So for those of you who don't know, these are where our branches are across the country, and pretty much all of them are participating in the next City Nature Challenge. And that's going to be the theme of our next webinar, because that long weekend of the 28th of April to the 1st of May is when the next City Nature Challenge is happening. We've got a lot of training happening that crew are doing, so keep an eye on our social media accounts at the BotSoc. And we are hoping to see you all in the field out there contributing and helping to build our knowledge base. So we're looking forward to that. And I'm going to conclude this webinar and see you in 10 minutes on the other link. And thank you for joining us. It's always really nice to engage with you all across the country and across the world. And we will see you anon. Take care. Goodbye.